Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take complex evidence, the smallest details, and, the most obscure connections, and we turn them into clear, compelling narratives of truth.
Today, we're venturing into the darkness of some long unsolved cases, specifically 3 investigations centered in Germany across Cologne and Berlin.
Right.
These are cases where the perpetrators, for decades in some instances, really believed they had perfected the crime. They thought the passing of time, maybe the lack of immediate evidence, had just guaranteed their freedom.
And our mission today is to really dissect that exact moment that confidence shattered. We're looking at the mechanics of closure, focusing not just on the gruesome details of the crimes, but on the intellectual and forensic breakthroughs that finally delivered justice.
We have 3 really powerful models for you today, and each one relies on a completely different investigative philosophy. We'll explore the triumph of advanced, almost miraculous trace DNA technology, the indispensable necessity of rigorous criminal psychology to spot deceptive staging, and finally, the meticulous application of pattern recognition combined with toxicology to unmask a serial predator.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what unites these incredibly diverse investigations is the power of the unexpected detail. In one case, it was a skin flake stuck to decades-old adhesive tape.
Unbelievable.
In another, it was the specific, almost theatrical arrangement of drawers. And in the last, a tiny failed attempt to buy a train ticket. It's the forensic echo that the criminal couldn't silence.
That notion of an echo is perfect. Criminals often only focus on the immediate crime scene, but these cases prove that the past never truly stays silent, provided you have persistent investigators willing to listen, even 35 years later.
So let's start with a case that really defines the cold case landscape. The tragedy of Petronol in Cologne, 1988. This case wasn't stalled by a lack of evidence, but really by the limitations of the technology of its time.
The timeline is chillingly specific. The date is Sunday, February 14th, 1988, Valentine's Day.
Wow.
Around 10:30 in the morning, a person walking their dog on Albertstrasse in Cologne made this terrible discovery.
They found the body of 24-year-old Petronol. She was discovered behind a small wooden snack booth, what you'd call an Imbissbude in German. She was a mother to an 18-month-old daughter, and while married, she was separated from her husband.
And her clothing? A long t-shirt, black net stockings. It clearly indicated she was on her way home from celebrating Carnival.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Carnival in Cologne is not just a party. It's a massive citywide cultural event. It's huge.
It takes over the entire city for days, and this is the detail that makes the scene unforgettable. The location was directly on the route of the Sunday Carnival parade, the Schulenwiedelzug.
And it was due to start within the hour.
Within the hour, it created this logistical nightmare and a visually absurd moment for the police. Investigators arrive. They start their critical forensic analysis, like spore sampling, around 11 a.m. The parade traditionally begins at exactly 11 a.m.
So there's no time. There's no time to reroute this massive procession with thousands of people.
Absolutely none. I mean, can you imagine the difficulty? Not just the physical presence of the crowd, but the atmospheric clash of, celebration and this profound trauma.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah, the police had to basically integrate the investigation into the celebratory route. They had to frantically inform the organizers, the participants, that they were passing through an active, profound crime scene.
So what did they do?
The procession was instructed not to play music while passing the site where Petronol lay.
I can just imagine that moment of silence, the colorful floats, the costumed people, all passing mutely through a police cordon. And then, 100 meters later, the music just starts up again?
Exactly. It's a powerful metaphor for how trauma just briefly interrupts the flow of normal life, which then just carries on.
And that trauma was immediately evident, right?
Oh, yes. The initial autopsy revealed a scene of shocking violence. The forensic doctor noted massive, overwhelming force, particularly focused on the head and neck. She ultimately bled out.
And the doctor specifically commented on the brutality.
They did. They made a point of noting the extreme brutality, saying they had rarely seen such strong, explosive violence in their career.
That degree of violence, it often suggests something other than a quick robbery, even if her handbag was missing.
Precisely. Investigators initially considered robbery, given the missing handbag.
Yeah.
Then they thought, okay, attempted sexual assault, given the time, the place, the carnival context.
But that was ruled out.
Pretty quickly, yeah. Her clothing was intact, properly worn, and there were no specific injuries to suggest a completed sexual offense. This immediately pushed the focus toward maybe a robbery gone violently wrong or a random act of rage. But the level of violence, the overkill, It just hints at something deeper.
So in 1988, with the tools they had, what was the investigative priority? Biological profiling, as we know it, wasn't really an option.
No, the focus was all on physical contact evidence. Fiber forensics was the state-of-the-art method for identifying contact between the victim and perpetrator.
So they're looking for tiny threads of clothing.
Meticulously, they collected textile fibers from Petronell's clothing and body. Based on those fibers, the colors, the materials, they constructed a detailed public description of the suspect's outfit.
And what did that description say?
It was surprisingly specific. The suspect was likely wearing jeans, a black leather jacket, and they presumed he had cognac-colored suede shoes or boots.
That gives them something visual to chase, but without a biological identifier, a name, a face.
Yeah.
They're relying entirely on public leads.
And they worked tirelessly. They checked individuals connected to her, used public appeals, distributed thousands of posters, interviewed anyone at the discotheque she'd planned to attend.
But nothing came of it.
After about 6 months of intensive work, the leads just ran dry. The file was classified as a cold case.
And for Petra Knoll's family, especially her daughter, who was only 18 months old, that means decades of unanswered questions. That kind of uncertainty is just a living wound.
It is. The daughter, raised by her grandparents, later talked about the profound sense of injustice. She remembered as a small child calling out for her mother. The biographical evidence is often the most heartbreaking. Her mother had kept a detailed baby book that just abruptly stopped after 18 months, blank pages for a life she never got to share.
So that case file just sat there for 30 years, a symbol of unsolved injustice, until a conscious effort was made to revisit the past.
Exactly. Fast forward 3 decades to 2018. The Cologne police, under Kriminalhauptkommissar Markus Weber, launched a highly systematic review. They committed to looking at 195 unsolved homicides in the Cologne area, dating all the way back to 1970.
That is an ambitious undertaking. It's a real recognition that technology might finally be able to catch up to old evidence.
It was very strategic. They were specifically looking for cases where physical evidence had been meticulously preserved, but where, 1980s technology had failed them. Petra Knoll's case was a prime candidate because the original investigators were so thorough in collecting trace evidence, even if they didn't know what that evidence would eventually yield.
And they decided the best way to leverage that cold file was to put it back in front of the public.
Absolutely. Cold case teams often rely on the fact that relationships and loyalties change over time. A guilty conscience might finally surface. The case was featured on the hugely popular German true crime program, Aktenzeichen XY Ungelöst, in December 2022.
And that broadcast, it finally delivered the crucial human element they needed.
It did. A caller reported being out with a friend named Norbert K. on the night of the murder. The caller had gone home, but Norbert K. continued in the same direction Petra Knoll had been heading.
And the key detail wasn't just that he was there, it was his behavior afterwards.
Right. He acted suspiciously the next day, avoiding any conversation about the area or the crime, which was, of course, dominating the local news.
But the caller was reluctant to actually name him at first.
Fear, primarily. Fear of retaliation, maybe fear of being wrong, or just the complexity of breaking a long-standing friendship, even with a suspected killer. But Weber's team, through persistent communication and building trust, convinced the caller to provide the name. Norbert K.
And at the time of this tip, Norbert K. is 55 years old, living what seems to be a completely normal, unremarkable life in Cologne. A wife, children.
Yes. And when the police confronted him, he categorically denied the crime. But he did provide a saliva sample for DNA comparison.
He must have been confident, thinking that whatever evidence they had from 1988 would be useless.
That's the likely assumption. And this is where we shift to the extraordinary forensic science of the 21st century. They turn to Professor Cornelius Kurz, a leading expert in forensic molecular genetics. The key wasn't the victim's clothing itself. It was the decades-old fiber-securing foils.
Securing foil. So we're basically talking about specialized forensic adhesive tape.
Precisely. Back in '88, investigators used these strips, they look a bit like clear packing tape, to lift textile fibers from the victim's body for that fiber analysis we talked about. They were sealed and stored.
And what those investigators couldn't have known was that they were also collecting the most minute trace DNA.
Cellular material, primarily skin flakes, and these flakes proved incredibly resistant to degradation over time because they were sealed, protected from the environment.
So evidence collected for one type of analysis became the key for a completely different one. 35 years later. The process of recovering that DNA from the tape sounds incredibly delicate.
It was revolutionary and painstaking. Standard DNA extraction methods involve washing the material, which would likely contaminate the sample or just miss the most fragile cellular matter. Kurz's team did something different.
What did they do?
They employed highly trained technical assistants who worked under high-powered microscopes using fine tweezers.
And what were they looking for?
They were looking for and manually removing thousands of single, microscopically visible skin flakes.
So they're literally picking off individual skin cells.
One by one, with tweezers, under a microscope. Think about the precision required, identifying a microscopic flake of human skin on a background of old adhesive and fibers, and then carefully lifting it without destroying it. This process took months of focused, repetitive labor.
That detail is just astonishing. The commitment to manually scrape the past, cell by cell.
It really speaks to the dedication of modern cold case teams. By processing these flakes individually, they could minimize contamination and concentrate the specific human cellular material needed to generate a full DNA profile.
And the outcome of all this meticulous work.
The generated DNA profile from the foreign skin flakes found on that tape, it matched Norbert K. It was a virtually certain identification.
Wow.
The vast majority of skin flakes belonged to Petronol, of course, but those few foreign cells left behind by her attacker were the proof they needed.
And the resolution, as you mentioned, is just hauntingly synchronous.
Norbert K. was arrested on February 14th, 2023, exactly 35 years to the day after the murder.
Unbelievable.
He was sentenced to life in prison in March 2024. For the victim's daughter, this wasn't just a conviction. It was the final, hard-won realization that the criminal who thought he was safe had his future stolen by a microscopic detail collected 3 decades prior. This case is a global primer on the absolute necessity of preserving all physical evidence.
Okay, that first case was a testament to forensic technology overcoming time. Now let's shift completely from the cold, logical precision of trace DNA to the messy, complicated realm of criminal psychology and deliberate deception. We're moving to Berlin.
This deep dive centers around murder commissioner Ingo Kexel, whose primary skill was reading the psychological subtext of a crime scene. When a criminal tries to make the scene look like something it isn't, that's when a behavioral expert becomes crucial.
The initial crime report came on November 21st, 2016 in Berlin-Mogelheim. A man calls in, says he's found his 67-year-old mother-in-law, Marita K., dead. He suggests she was the victim of a random fatal burglary.
Kexel arrived and immediately knew that initial theory was wrong. He trusted his gut, which was, backed by decades of experience. A professional, goal-oriented burglar, as he explained it, operates with efficiency. They only cause the necessary chaos to locate valuables quickly.
So what were the specific psychological red flags that signaled this scene was just a performance?
The mess was too deliberate, too perfect. He noticed that clothing piles were pulled out of closets and drawers in a single large mass. A real thief doesn't do that. They search through the items, tossing things randomly. This looks like someone creating the appearance of a search, not actually conducting one.
And the detail about the drawers sounds like someone trying to imitate a movie.
It was highly theatrical. In the living room, multiple drawers were open to the exact same extent. Kexel described this uniformity as creating a gallery or being picturesque.
Picturesque chaos.
Exactly. It's meticulous chaos. An attempt to achieve the visual effect of a ransacked house without the functional chaos required to actually find anything. This suggests the perpetrator is trying to redirect police attention toward a random outsider, a signature of intimate partner or familial crime.
So the staging points to calculated self-preservation. But the violence itself told a deeper story.
Precisely. Beyond the staged mess, Marita K. had suffered numerous cuts and stab wounds, a level of violence far beyond what was necessary to silence her or ensure an escape. Kexel immediately identified this as a clear example of the overkill principle.
For our listeners, let's slow down on that concept. Why is overkill so significant in forensic psychology?
It fundamentally changes the motive profile. A rational criminal, like a professional burglar, uses the minimum force necessary to achieve their objective. Any extra violence increases their risk of injury, forensic exposure, and heightens the severity of the charge if they're caught.
Overkill is irrational, emotional.
It's a rage reaction. The violence is driven by personal hatred, deep frustration, intense anger toward that specific individual. It's not about money, it's about elimination and expression. So overkill strongly suggests the suspect is someone known to the victim.
Which shifts the investigation entirely away from the random stranger.
And the focus immediately turned to the man who discovered the body and reported it. The victim's son-in-law, Dennis M.
And the behavioral clues started surfacing almost immediately.
often recognized by the family themselves. Marita Kay's daughter, who was Dennis M's partner, noted he was wearing unfamiliar shoes at the scene. When she asked why, he provided an immediate and unnecessary lie.
What was the lie?
He claimed the police had already taken his usual pair of shoes for forensic comparison, but the police hadn't collected any footwear evidence yet. They hadn't even established a need for it. This unprompted, transparent fabrication was a huge red flag.
A non-suspect doesn't need to preemptively explain their personal belongings.
Exactly. And as investigators dug into Dennis M's background, they realized the motive the overkill suggested, deep personal friction, was fueled by a vast financial deception.
He was a master of facade.
Completely. He actively cultivated this image of a wealthy, sophisticated labman, a successful, worldly man. He even created a portfolio of professional headshots to maintain this persona for his partner and her family.
And the scope of his deceit included sophisticated forgery, right? He faked documents.
He did. He fabricated an approbation, which is the official state license required to practice medicine in Germany. He had fake business cards. He was leveraging the social capital of being a successful doctor while being chronically, desperately broke.
So he was completely dependent on this financial deception.
Absolutely. He was constantly borrowing large sums of money from his partner's family, always with elaborate excuses. His bank account was frozen, his card was stolen, some technical snag. The reality was he was completely financially strapped.
And Marita Kay, the victim, was the one person who saw through the veneer.
She was the obstacle. She grew increasingly suspicious of his claims and strongly disapproved of her daughter's relationship with him. She was likely threatening to expose him or demand repayment.
Which provides the explosive personal motive needed for the overkill. A blend of rage at being exposed and desperation over his financial collapse.
Right. The staging pointed to him, the motive pointed to him, and then forensics provided the indisputable physical evidence.
The smoking gun was in the washing machine.
Yes. Investigators discovered freshly washed laundry, specifically Dennis M's clothes, with traces of blood residue inside Marita Kay's own washing machine.
Why did he have access to the machine?
He claimed he had come over that morning to help in the garden and had brought a change of clean clothes with him. This allowed him to immediately change out of the clothes he wore during the attack and attempt to sanitize the evidence in the victim's own machine.
But the blood residue was still there.
Even after a wash cycle, it was irrefutable proof of his presence and involvement. Just 2 days after the murder, Dennis M. was arrested.
And did he confess?
He admitted to being there, to a physical altercation, but tried to claim self-defense. Kexel's theory was that Dennis M. likely went there intending to steal money when Marita Kay was out. She came back unexpectedly, and the confrontation led to the rage and the murder.
The arrest of Dennis M. for the murder of his mother-in-law then forced investigators to confront a much darker possibility that this pattern had happened before.
This is where the power of pattern recognition truly comes into play. If a crime is psychologically driven, the perpetrator often repeats their methods. And Dennis M.'s daughter, disturbed by her father's actions, approached investigators with deep doubts about the previously closed case of her own mother, Ina M.
Enid M., Dennis M.'s wife, had allegedly died by suicide hanging in 2013 after a battle with cancer.
And just like the 2016 murder, Dennis M. was the person who discovered the body and reported it, presenting himself as a man utterly devastated by loss. His extreme display of grief was so convincing that it completely distracted the initial responders.
So Kexel's team re-examined the 2013 file, looking for those same telltale signs of staging and deception.
They did. First, they looked at the medical facts, specifically lividity or livor mortis. For our listeners, lividity is the pooling of blood in the lowest parts of the body after death, driven by gravity. It sets and fixes after a few hours.
And what did Ina M.'s lividity reveal about her position after death?
It indicated that her body had only lain down after death and had been in that position for a sustained period. This fact contradicted the idea that she had been hanging for hours.
Because if she had been hanging, the blood would have pooled in her legs.
Exactly, in her feet and lower legs. The fixed lividity pattern showed that she was likely killed or incapacitated, placed on the floor, and then the staging began. It's a forensic detail that cannot be manipulated by an emotional performance.
The body can't lie.
Precisely. The team then meticulously examined the suicide construction found in the apartment hallway. It was described as complex, incredibly impractical, and fundamentally unsuitable for actually supporting a person's weight.
And to prove this, they did a physical reconstruction.
They took the dramatic step of rebuilding the exact configuration using the same materials, and they used an investigator who matched the victim's body weight. The result: the material simply snapped. The setup was clearly designed to look like a suicide attempt, not a functioning mechanism for death.
It sounds like the initial investigation was just blinded by his emotional performance.
That's the critical takeaway. The initial police were so moved by his extreme, pitiable grief, the man who had watched his wife suffer from cancer and then tragically lose her to suicide, that the necessary alarm bells just failed to ring. He successfully cast himself as the victim of fate.
When in reality, Ina M. had planned to leave him.
Yes, meaning he was again facing the loss of his financial and emotional safety net, and he chose violent elimination and subsequent staging to prevent his collapse.
So what was the final outcome?
Kexel characterized him as a monster in sheep's clothing, a textbook psychopath. Dennis M. was convicted of murder in the case of Marita K., with special severity of guilt recognized and manslaughter in the case of Ina M. This investigation proves you must always trust the physical and psychological fingerprints over the emotional narrative.
Our final case takes us back to Berlin into an entirely different dimension of forensic science: toxicology and pattern recognition. Here, the challenge wasn't old evidence or staging, but recognizing a serial pattern hidden by a highly effective, yet difficult-to-trace poison.
This is the investigation that fell to Andreas Foches, head of the Fourth Murder Commission, and the initial call he received in May 2012 was confusing and easily dismissible, which really highlights the challenges of investigating crimes without obvious physical injury.
The date is May 5, 2012. The location: the Gross Freiheit 114, a gay venue in Berlin-Friedrichshain, specifically within the darkroom section.
Nikki M., 37, a regular guest, was found dead by the barman during cleanup. There were no visible external injuries, no trauma, no signs of a struggle. To Foch, the death had a murky quality. He described it as a 60-40 feeling. Something was off, but medically, it could have been natural causes or an accidental intoxication. The initial autopsy was inconclusive.
So on its own, this death was a closed file. What was the one tiny fact that kept the case from completely stalling?
The disappearance of personal effects. Nikki M.'s credit card and phone were missing. This immediately established a potential motive of theft, shifting the case from ambiguous death to criminal activity.
And the missing credit card provided the immediate digital fingerprint.
Yes. The card was attempted to be used almost immediately after his death at the Berlin Ostbahnhof, the East train station. The attempted purchase was a train ticket to Saarbrücken, but the card was declined. So that established two crucial facts: a specific financial motive and a precise geographical and temporal link.
But without a body of evidence, literally, the investigation was still stuck. They didn't know how he had died.
Exactly. The true breakthrough required an element of sheer luck, the survival of a victim.
And weeks later, the investigation was radically altered by the experience of a young man named Miroslav.
Miroslav was waiting for a train at the Warschauer Strasse station at 6 a.m. A stranger, who was outwardly friendly and completely harmless looking, struck up a conversation. This stranger offered Miroslav a small bottle of liqueur, a popular German schnapps called Kleiner Feigling.
Miroslav took the drink, thinking it was a friendly gesture, and then the poison took effect almost immediately.
He described a horrifying sensation, an explosion in his head, followed by immediate, overwhelming nausea. He rapidly lost consciousness at the Ostbahnhof, suffering severe cardiac and respiratory arrest. He was saved only by the swift action of a young woman named Nice, who saw him collapse and immediately called an ambulance.
He was in a coma, but doctors were able to stabilize him. What did the toxicology reports reveal?
Doctors confirmed he had been poisoned with liquid ecstasy, or KO drops, which is the common name for gamma-hydroxybutyrate, or GHB. Crucially, his money and credit card were gone, confirming the sequence: friendly approach, poisoning, incapacitation, and theft.
Let's pause on the poison itself. Why are KO drops so insidious and difficult to detect?
GHB is a central nervous system depressant. It's often colorless and odorless, making it easy to administer in drinks. In low doses, it can induce euphoria, but in slightly higher doses, it rapidly causes loss of consciousness, amnesia, and critically respiratory depression.
And from a forensic standpoint, why is it so challenging?
It has a very short half-life. GHB is metabolized by the body extremely quickly, often disappearing from the bloodstream within hours.
So if you're not specifically looking for it, you'll miss it.
You will absolutely miss it. The symptoms can also easily mimic an accidental overdose or a sudden cardiac event.
So Miroslav's survival and his immediate identification of the toxin were the key.
Absolutely. When Miroslav checked his bank statement, he noticed two unusual transactions for the German rail service, Deutsche Bahn. These transactions, small thefts attempting to purchase tickets, matched the location and the product from the earlier unsolved Nikki M case.
That must have been the light bulb moment for Commissar Foges.
It was. Miroslav's report, including the toxin and the specific type of theft, was immediately relayed to the medical examiner responsible for Nikki M's autopsy. They initiated a highly specific reanalysis, looking solely for traces of GHB. And they found it. Nikki M also had KO drops in his system, but in a toxic, lethal range.
So a seemingly random death was retroactively identified as murder.
And a serial killer was identified. The investigation shifted instantly. They knew they were hunting a predator, targeting homosexual men, using GHB to incapacitate them before robbing them and using their cards at the train station. The pattern was established.
And that pattern quickly expanded to a third victim.
Yes, thanks to the tenacity of a concerned family member who followed the news. About 2 weeks after the Nikki M murder, an elderly woman contacted Foges. She mentioned her grandson, Alexander M., who had died unexpectedly at home in late April. Critically, she mentioned he was homosexual and that items were missing from his apartment.
Unexplained death, homosexual, missing belongings. The similarities are too strong to be a coincidence.
Foges immediately ordered an autopsy. The results confirmed the devastating serial pattern. Alexander M. was also killed by KO drops.
What were the specifics of that scene?
In Alexander M.'s apartment, the perpetrator had administered the poison and then, in this bizarre display of control, put the victim to bed and covered him up. After this almost nurturing gesture, the killer stole a jacket and left.
That detail, putting the victim to bed, that speaks volumes about the killer's pathology. It's not just a thief.
No, it shows a complex pathology centered on control, the ability to render a man helpless, steal from him, and then treat him like a child.
So how did they move from the pattern to a name?
They examined Alexander M.'s phone records and social media. One of the last contacts was a 37-year-old teaching student named Dirk P. They put him under surveillance, and this led to the final, indisputable physical link.
The stolen jacket.
Exactly. Surveillance video from the Ostbahnhof, the same location where all this was happening, showed the man who had attacked Miroslav, Dirk P., wearing the jacket that had been stolen from Alexander M.'s apartment. The pattern was closed. The suspect was identified.
Dirk P. was quickly apprehended. What happened during the confrontation?
During the drive to the police station, he started talking, admitting he was the last person to see Alexander M. He was vague, but he admitted his presence.
And when police searched his apartment, they found something that suggested he might have been waiting for them.
It's a classic detail in these investigations. The killer often leaves a clue or a trophy. Investigators found a bottle of that same liqueur, Kleiner Fiegling, prominently displayed in his apartment. They felt it was intentionally placed for them to find.
Almost as if he wanted to be caught.
It can be a subconscious desire for intervention. And when he was finally pressed, the established motive wasn't financial at all.
What was it?
Psychiatric evaluations concluded his true motivation was power, to be lord over life and death. Her Überleben um Tod. He derived profound enjoyment from watching his victims die and controlling their final moments.
It confirms that the theft was just secondary to the act of control.
It fits the profile of a deeply psychopathic person who lacks any genuine empathy. The evidence ultimately linked Dirk P. to a total of 4 victims.
The case was solved, but the ending remains dark.
Dirk P. was sentenced to life imprisonment. However, shortly after his conviction, he took his own life while in custody. This investigation is just a powerful testament to connecting disparate facts. A survivor linking a specific toxin to a tiny, failed financial transaction from an earlier ambiguous death, revealing a pattern that would otherwise have remained completely invisible.
This has been a heavy but deeply compelling look at how persistence, technology, and sheer insight can pull decades of injustice back into the light. We've seen 3 fundamentally different methods bring 3 different cold cases to a successful conclusion.
We've really established 3 major pillars of modern cold case resolution. First, the incredible endurance of forensic evidence. The Petronol case with microscopic skin flakes on 35-year-old tape yielding a full DNA profile, it proves even the most fragile evidence can be the key.
Second, the indispensable role of criminal psychology, particularly with Dennis M. The ability of Commissioner Kexel to see past staged chaos, to recognize the emotional signature of overkill, and to use objective facts like lividity to debunk a manipulated suicide scene.
It proves that criminal pathology leaves psychological fingerprints that are often harder to destroy than physical ones.
Right. And third, the critical combination of toxicology and digital pattern recognition in the Dirk P case. Connecting victims via a previously overlooked poison like GHB was only possible because the survivor's testimony was cross-referenced with a small, failed attempt to buy a train ticket.
That revealed the killer's operational signature.
And the common thread, running through the silent carnival parade in Cologne to the dark rooms of Berlin, is the relentless work of cold case teams and the necessity of public vigilance. The anonymous tipster, the daughter who voiced her doubts, the passerby who saved Miroslav Justice, often requires a community effort.
All three of these perpetrators, Norbert K., Dennis M., and Dirk P., shared a fatal arrogance. They miscalculated the future, they underestimated the tenacity of investigators, the vigilance of witnesses, and most critically, they failed to account for the speed at which technology would advance to meet the evidence they left behind.
So we leave you with this final provocative thought. We've seen investigators succeed by using technologies that literally did not exist when the evidence was first collected. If technology, toxicology, and pattern recognition continue to accelerate at this rate, constantly upgrading the tools of justice, will the concept of a true cold case, a case destined never to be solved, ever truly exist again?
The scientific timeline is rapidly collapsing. The clock is always ticking for the criminal, but now, time is becoming the greatest ally of justice.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.